Can I say something controversial?
I would love that.
Persecution is the fun part of Mormonism.
Go on.
It's a little bit fun. Well, especially because it's imagined.
It makes you feel special.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of drama.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Katie.
I'm Elisa.
And this is Please Bless This Podcast, the podcast where two sisters talk about all things Mormon and pop culture, and sometimes essential oils.
Oh, here we go.
Here we go. You know, actually, this makes sense. I have a nice cup of herbal heartburn tea brewed up with some like marshmallow root.
Wow.
Laree Westover would approve. 100%.
Are you eschewing doctors at this stage in your life?
I literally saw a doctor yesterday.
Blasphemy.
So sorry.
We've hinted around it, but today's episode is about Educated, the memoir by Tara Westover, published in 2018, New York Times bestseller, on Obama's reading list that year, made millions of dollars.
Yeah.
A great big deal of a book.
Yes. I was just saying before we recorded that it's kind of insane that I hadn't read it until just recently. I don't know how I evaded it for so long.
Only and everybody was been like, such a phenomenon.
And it's like Mormon adjacent. Everybody's like, you have to read this book. And I'm like, I know, you know.
Right.
No, turns out I did.
Or is it Mormon adjacent?
Or is it?
That's the real question. So at the very beginning of the book, Tara Westover includes an epigraph that says, "This story is not about Mormonism." And we are not sure we agree.
No. And as a matter of fact, as soon as I heard that, because I listened to the audiobook, as soon as I heard that, I pressed pause and I was like, this is going to be a lot.
Yeah. Why do you think that's there?
Well, it kind of seems par for the course, you know, when you consider like how desperate she was to maintain her familial relationships. She's probably still like doing whatever she can to like maintain face and not be possessed by the devil. Maybe. But also, for the most part, as I read it, like if I were not or had never been Mormon, I wouldn't think that this was an attack on Mormons. It really only is if you know a lot about Mormonism and I agree with the connections.
And that's one thing I think is so fascinating. Like, she's clearly conflicted about her estrangement with her family, her estrangement from Mormonism. And I agree with you. I think there's this effort to not make it about Mormonism as a way to like keep the peace.
Yeah.
Both with her family and with her many, many Mormon friends, mentors. Yeah. She doesn't want to be like, I'm attacking your beliefs. She just wants to be like, I'm telling a story about my life.
Right.
And on some level, I really relate to that as someone who is creating public facing content about Mormonism. I recognize that that's like a fraught position to be in.
For sure. And we've not talked about this before, but it's something we struggle with a lot and we talk about a lot. And I know we talk to our spouses about it a lot and our therapists, and like, it's not an easy thing to just do. It's not like a simple choice to make.
You're sort of constantly self-assessing. Like, am I saying too much? Am I self-editing too much? And why?
Right.
What is my motivation here? And is it healthy? Those are questions I can completely understand having if you're writing a book about your Mormon upbringing.
For sure.
For a broad audience, I think that's a really brave thing to do.
At the same time, considering the trigger warning abuse that she endured her whole childhood and adolescence, I can't help but feel it makes me a little bit angry. Who are you protecting?
Right.
There had to have been people in her life, in the church, her bishop, her whoever, her young women's leaders who turned a blind eye when they saw, you know, people who were clearly children who were neglected, people who were violent.
Evidence of violence, evidence of mental illness.
Right.
100%.
Yeah. Those people should be held accountable.
In that way, this story hinges on Mormonism because Mormonism enabled so much of the behavior of her abusive father and brother.
Mhm.
So let's back up before we get too into that kind of key
Yeah.
question. Is this a story about Mormonism?
Mhm.
Let's give like a quick recap of the book for the handful of people left on Earth who have not already read it.
Okay. You
Oh,
want me to give a Katie recap?
yeah, give a Katie recap.
So think what some of you may be familiar with. Think Ruby Ridge, think survivalist Mormon family in the woods in the mountains in Idaho.
Mhm,
Think junkyard kids being put to work, no birth certificate, no school, just toiling over scrap metal.
mhm,
And this goes on for years and years. And there's a load of kids, Tara Westover being one of them, bipolar, probably traumatic brain injured dad
mhm,
who rules over the family and lords over them. I mean, and they see him as being almost like a Joseph Smith figure. He
mhm.
has
Receiving
revelations,
revelation.
yes, and a mom who's just a subservient Mormon mom. That goes on. Lots of terrible things happen. Like we said, child neglect, horrific injuries. They don't believe in doctors. So
Mhm,
they treat things at home with things like essential oils, which the mom makes later to become a bit of an essential oil mogul down the line. Some of the kids get away, go to school. Some of the kids stick around. Some of them are like so traumatized and fucked up from their upbringing that they fall into the same patterns as their dad. Perhaps they have the same mental illness, but it also
mhm.
seems to be attributed to like straight up brain injuries because they are so often injured
Yeah.
working in a literal junkyard. Tara endures a lot of abuse from one specific brother that is really horrific and hard to read about.
Mhm.
And she, I don't know, by the grace of God, somehow escapes and manages to convince the good people at BYU that
Mm,
she should be admitted there, even though she's never had a day of any
yeah.
schooling in her life.
And even though she had just barely turned 17?
Yeah. And she goes to BYU, and so begins a new story for her slowly but surely. She finds her way in the world, has a lot of academic success, but continues to go home to her family who are horrible to her, a
Mhm.
mother who chooses her abusive husband over her children. You can imagine. It's very upsetting. But over time, like I said, lots of academic success, and she leaves the church. She doesn't say that outright, but she, starts
Hints at
living
it
with a
pretty heavily.
boyfriend,
Yeah.
and then by the end of the book, she has like cut all ties with her parents and a couple of her siblings and has the support of a few of them. Bada bing, bada boom, educated.
Educated.
You've just been educated.
Lots of really interesting themes in the book about education as like a thing that sets you free, but that can also complicate your life. Like she talks about her education sort of saving her, but also being a thing she really resents because the
Mm-hmm.
more she sees of the world and experiences, the more she realizes that her father is not a good, righteous, trustworthy person, that her
Right.
mother did not protect her,
Mm-hmm.
that the beliefs she was raised with, which were extreme, are like not valid at all.
Right.
And there's a brutality in that reality
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
that really comes through. Another sort of key theme of the book is about families and what we owe our families and what loyalty to family means, which
Mm-hmm.
again is a thing Katie and I have talked about really explicitly ourselves, just in the context of this podcast. Like, what does
Yeah.
it mean to be true to your family, but also true to your own experience and your own values? And those are hard questions. And then also, like, a thing that comes up over and over again is the unreliability of our own memories and our
Yes.
own histories. Her PhD is in history, and she studies specifically historiography, which is like the study of how history gets made,
Mm-hmm.
the methodologies of history.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really like inherently about a sort of skepticism towards objective fact, objective accounts of the past, and the actual impossibility of objective facts. So like she's grappling with that intellectually, but also in her own experience, because she has all these memories of her childhood, but they're constantly being questioned
Mhm.
by the other people in her life, or just outrightly lied about by the other
Yeah.
people in her life. So she's
Which
like consistently like, I remember this, but so and so remembers this differently. And
yeah,
so was like, I wasn't even there.
right.
And isn't that tricky?
Yeah, and she talks about later on in her life when she's maybe at the point where she's already getting an advanced degree, where she questions her own memory all the time, even when it
Mhm.
comes to the most minute things, just always trusting the opinion of another over her own.
Yeah.
And that's so sad.
Yeah. Like at one point, she's like, I wanted to ask, is this book blue? Is that man tall?
Yeah.
Because she's just not even trusting in her own sense of the world anymore.
Hmm.
So lots going on in this book, but I just like could not shake that epigraph about
Yeah,
how this is not a story about Mormonism.
for sure.
In part because of obviously the way we're thinking about pop culture and Mormonism in this
Yeah,
podcast, but also because the story seems so Mormon to me.
for sure. And fringe Mormon for the most part and on the part of her family, but that doesn't change the fact that they were going to traditional LDS services,
Right.
you know.
And like a fringe group literally can't exist without a mainstream version, right? Like it had to come from something.
Yeah.
And it came from the same Mormonism we grew up with.
Mhm.
I would call our upbringing very mainstream Mormonism. We
Yeah.
were devout, but we
Mhm.
also went to school, went to the doctor,
Red Harry
um,
Potter.
read Harry Potter. We weren't stockpiling ammunition
No,
for
but
when
we
the
had food
government came for us,
storage.
but we did have food storage. Yes, I do want to talk about that. Like,
Yeah,
there is a prepper vibe in mainstream Mormonism too.
for sure.
So, yeah, is this a story about Mormonism? I was looking up reviews of the book and I found a couple I just wanted to quickly reference
Yeah.
that kind of grapple with this question.
Okay.
So, one of them is written by a Yale English professor named John Durham Peters. It's called Another Mormon Education. It's a rave review, like he loved Educated. And he grew up in a Mormon family, but is not a practicing Mormon.
Mhm.
And he talks about how Educated is like fundamentally a Mormon story, and
Mhm.
how the story of like moving from your like rural, humble upbringing to like extreme academic accolades is such a story that Mormons love.
Yeah.
And he even references like Joseph Smith, born in obscurity, born in poverty, but by the time of his assassination in 1844, he's this like massive figure in the religious world. He's also running for president at the
Yeah.
time. So there's this rise from obscurity that Mormons love.
Mhm.
This was something he called out that I thought was interesting. Among the top 15 leaders of the church are men with advanced degrees from Duke, Harvard, Oxford, Purdue, Stanford, Yale.
Yeah.
Mormons love an education. They love a prestigious
Yes.
education.
They love prestige.
Yes. It's not like non-Mormons don't, but
Sure.
Mormons really, really do.
Mhm.
I also thought it was interesting. He called her memoir a captivity narrative.
Mm.
She was captive to her family, her
Yeah.
religion, to this place. And that this kind of like rise from captivity really fits within Mormon culture. He says it fits a culture whose literature, starting with the Book of Mormon's extended war scenes, has a violent streak. And that was something I hadn't really thought about, how, like, as a Mormon child, you are introduced to violence
Mhm.
through the scriptures so matter of factly, so early.
Mhm.
There is a real violence to the tradition.
Yeah, and like the concept of martyrdom, I
Mm-hmm.
thought of you could and you should be, if asked, a martyr,
Mm-hmm.
for the
Yeah.
church.
Yes, those are heavy themes to
That's
be teaching
wild.
young children.
Yeah.
He also says many readers seemed odd that this Idaho Mormon girl would be studying modern political thought at the highest levels, but what better training could there be for reading John Stuart Mill than reading Joseph Smith?
Yeah.
Same era, same style, and like she was brought up on these like obscure sermons from these old white men. And then he says, there is no more fundamental question in the Mormon tradition than that of testimony and witness.
Mm-hmm.
Truth.
Yeah. And really, yeah. Who more perfect to go into the field that she's in than someone just like her?
So that's a Mormon adjacent scholar saying, oh, this book is definitely about Mormonism. It's quintessentially Mormon.
Mm-hmm.
Then I found a review published in BYU Studies Quarterly. So a current believing Mormon. It's Angela Hallstrom, who also praises the book, but she's very careful to point out, oh, Westover says this isn't about Mormonism, and it's really not. And she writes, what the book is not, however, is a meditation on the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Mm-hmm. While Westover spends some time in the book grappling with spiritual questions, the themes that truly animate the narrative are centered on family. What does it mean to belong to a family? Mm. And when I read that, I was like, how is that not a spiritual question?
Right.
Especially to a Mormon. How is that not the core spiritual question of Mormonism?
Yeah. How does that not have everything to do with Mormonism?
What does it mean to belong to a family?
Yeah, because the answer will be different for a Mormon.
Because you're a Mormon. Yeah.
Because you're Mormon.
And there's your own sort of nuclear family, your own eternal family, but there's also your ward family and just like your family of faith. And what does it mean to belong to that and be true to that? Oh my gosh, if that's not the most Mormon question a person could ask, I just feel like they want it not to be about Mormonism because, you know, BYU, active Mormons don't want it to be about Mormonism because then it doesn't have to be critical of Mormonism.
Right. Tara Westover really beautifully toes the line. And I think it's to these people's benefit, you know, so they can say, you know, it's not a meditation on the LDS church.
Yeah.
You know, and get away with it. You know,
I know lots of believing Mormons, including our own parents, who read Educated and really liked it. And they recognize, you know, it's a troubling story, but they didn't feel threatened by it.
Right.
One other thing I wanted to call out, another review of sorts that I found. I just happened upon this on Facebook last week. A friend of a friend read Educated and posted their review on Facebook. And this is an active Mormon in 2022. And their review was that they hated it and they thought it was stupid and an attack on the church. And I was really taken aback by this because I was like, wait, she says it's not about Mormonism. Why do you feel attacked?
Right.
But then in the comments, all of these people were agreeing with her and saying, yep, it's just a flagrant attack on the church. It's flagrantly anti-LDS. And this person said, like, I wish she had said her dad's beliefs weren't representative of the church. And I thought, well, she kind of did, but also they are representative of the church. Yes. Patriarchy, survivalism, the last days, all of that stuff is embedded into Mormonism.
Right. Yeah. To us, it might seem fringe, but if you really think about it, it's more just old fashioned. Granted, he's crazy, but you know, that sort of domineering religious, ultra spiritual father who has revelations. I mean, you read about that kind of shit all the time in the way back in days. Old mountain man who thought he was hearing from God all the time. I don't know. It's not that crazy.
It's not that crazy. And even in modern mainstream Mormonism, for your like patriarchal leader, whether that's your dad or your bishop, to come to you and say, I've received a revelation on your behalf, normal. Sure, the content of that revelation is hopefully not completely unhinged like it was in the case of Tara Westover's father, but like normal.
Yeah, and delivered by someone who is like nice and clean shaven and in a pressed suit and nice and starchy and not covered in horrific scars and burns from their junkyard accidents.
There is a certain amount of like mainstream Mormons feeling protected from criticism in this book because they are of a different like class. And there's a certain class protection that they feel too. Well, I don't work in a junkyard. I'm different from this person because of my education, because of my income, because of whatever trappings.
I think that's all of it. Yeah.
One thing that I found interesting in this group of folks on Facebook reviewing the book really negatively was that a couple of them mentioned like knowing people who know the Westovers and saying like, well, I should ask them what they think. As if this random person who's tangentially related to the family would know more or be more honest than their own daughter. And just this mistrust of her because she was saying things they didn't want to hear really troubled me. And it just made me think about how one of the defenses of Mormonism I see a lot from believing members of the church is by its fruits you shall know it, right? Like the fruits of the church are evidence that the church is true. So the fact that it's still around when other religions of Joseph Smith's time have really sort of fizzled out, or that it does good in the world, or that there are all these temples, or that it's so prosperous, or that you are so prosperous, right? Like these are all the fruits of the gospel that bear witness to the truth of it. But Tara Westover's story is also the fruits of the gospel.
Yes.
Her dad, his violence and abuse, her brother's abuse, and the way it was protected. Those are the fruits of the gospel.
For sure.
And when you talk about that, the Mormons are like, well, not that. That's not what I mean when I say look at the fruit. I mean this like beautiful picture perfect fruit over here. But all of it is the fruit of Mormonism, including the FLDS, including Warren Jeffs, including white supremacist groups, including doomsday extremists, all of it.
Elisa, let the preppers prep.
The preppers can prep, but like the Mormons can't pretend that they aren't of the same tradition. So what's interesting to me about that is Tara Westover saying this isn't a book about Mormonism, but then all these people are like, yes, it is. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. And I'm mad about it.
Right.
And I just find that fascinating.
It's the ones who want it to not be about Mormonism the most are complaining that it is. It's like, just let it go.
Or just look inward for a minute.
Well, that for sure.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah.
Before you come after this book and this woman's credibility, like maybe take stock of why you're reacting this way for just a moment.
Yeah. I did think pretty much throughout the book, and I don't want this to come across the wrong way because I don't disbelieve her, but I did feel like sometimes the writing was a little bit dramatic.
Oh, sure.
In that she would like apply a number to things that sounded a little bit over dramatized. Like I watched TV for 20 hours
20 hours a day. Yeah, that's a lot.
It's like you didn't have to even say that, and she would just pepper in things like that occasionally that just make you kind of go, ugh,
I was kind of rubbed the wrong way when she talks about taking the ACT and it's the first test she's ever taken. And she's like asking the proctor, what do I do with this bubble sheet?
Right.
And I've taken enough standardized tests to know that every single one of them starts with like a 5-minute lecture about how to fill out bubble sheets.
Yes.
You're not just tossed in there. No matter how well you know your way around a bubble sheet, you're talked to about a bubble sheet.
Yes.
And so there were moments like that where I'm like, you don't have to play it up like this for it still to be a dramatic story.
For sure.
And I'm not trying to nitpick Tara Westover. I think
literally
that's part of the
only
genre of the memoir. Yes. And she herself, again, is very aware of the fact that her stories are being told from her perspective and another person would tell them differently.
Yeah.
There's like a self-awareness of that I think is important. But with that said, like, I believe her.
For sure.
I believe her story.
I did not like the story alone she tells where in her first year at BYU, she is confronted with the word Holocaust for the first time in her life and she doesn't recognize it. That alone, I believed, obviously. I don't think that that's made up. But that alone could have carried the whole book.
Yeah, you don't need the only story you have to tell.
You don't need to spice anything up, honey.
Yeah.
That's wild.
That's wild. Yeah, that's enough for us to go, whoa, what was happening with
Yeah.
your education, this homeschool education, this frontier survivalist education? There were some major gaps,
Yeah.
and they're problematic.
Yes. That's a pretty big one right there. I'm reading your notes and it's crazy to me that someone in that thread who was criticizing the book compared it to quote unquote the Crawdad movie. Interesting story ruined by lack of attention to detail.
Yep.
Holy smoke.
I mean, the Crawdad movie
Number
slash
one.
book, for one thing, is fictional.
Yeah.
For another thing, was written by like maybe a white supremacist murderer.
Murderer.
So,
Yeah.
like, not really equivalent levels of like scandal here.
No.
And making that comparison is just so defensive in a weird way.
Yeah. And like lack of attention to detail.
It's so detailed.
I don't see that. I
It
don't see
is
that, my
extremely
friend.
detailed. Yeah.
Yeah.
I read that Crawdad book. No. Not not a
That
similar.
Crawdad book does not compare. I'm so
No.
sorry.
Let's talk about then the ways that Tara Westover's story overlaps in our experience with mainstream Mormonism. Because I do think it does. I do think this is a story about Mormonism. So one thing I thought of was how she talks a lot about preparing to escape persecution.
Mm.
And obviously it's taken to an extreme. Like her dad tells them the feds are going to come steal them away or kill them. So they're like stockpiling fuel and guns and everything. But did you experience this in mainstream Mormonism? Like be prepared to run from persecutors? Because
Yeah,
I did.
for sure. Yeah, that's like the whole thing.
That's the whole thing. That's like our whole history.
Yeah.
Is like Mormons are being persecuted for no reason, mind you.
Mm-hmm.
And like having to move from place to place, and it is not over.
Can I say something controversial?
Please.
And very brave?
I would love that.
Persecution is the fun part of Mormonism.
Okay. Go on.
It's a little bit fun. Well, especially because it's imagined.
Mm-hmm.
It's imaginary.
It makes you feel special.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of drama.
You prepare.
Yeah.
You get ready. You have a little plan.
You have your food storage tucked away. Mm-hmm. You have your family photo albums ready.
Aw. And you get to like interpret things through that lens. Yeah. You know? That's
what a distinction.
Yeah.
It made me think of one summer at girls' camp. I'm 12 years old. Girls' camp is summer camp for Mormon girls.
Yes.
You go off to some church-owned property and you hang out and have spiritual experiences with your fellow teenage girls. So I'm 12 years old. Every year at girls' camp, there was something called a night hike. Yeah. And in my experience, it was always batshit. Yeah. And my first night hike ever at 12, we're hanging out in our teepees. We had teepees at girls' camp.
Yes.
Yeah. And all of a sudden, there's this commotion. People are like banging things and just making a lot of noise, hooping and hollering. And they're coming around to each campsite and saying like, grab whatever you can carry. We have to make a break for it. Like they're coming for us.
Oh, wow.
And we were scared. We were supposed to be scared.
Yeah.
And we like went on this little night hike and the destination was like Missouri.
What?
Yeah. And so we were roused out of our beds and scared into this little trek to fake Missouri in the woods where we would be safe from persecution.
Wow, that's beautiful.
I don't know who was running girls' camp that year, but can you imagine being in that pitch meeting? Like, what should we do for our night hike this year? I don't know. Let's scare the shit out of these kids.
You know, it was probably one young women's leader and then like all of the older girls whatever we called them. They had a
Yeah.
special name.
Yeah. I can't remember either. Like YCL is for some reason in my head, but
Oh,
youth
yeah, youth camp
something.
leader.
I have no idea.
They came up with it
Yeah.
and ran
And
with
they're
it.
like, won't this be fun? A little bit of drama.
Yeah. You want to know what we did? So, number one, night hikes were awesome, but we did snipe hunts
Oh, yeah, we
where
did
the
that too.
older girls, okay, yeah, we would just take little girls out in the woods and traumatize
And
them.
scare the
That
hell
was
out of
just
them.
fun. No adults involved.
Yeah, no adults, no persecution complex, but still fear.
Still fear. But one thing we did, which you maybe did this too, we did like emergency preparedness scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever do that? So we would do like there's been an accident
Mm-hmm.
at the docks and there are like drownings and you have to like go in the water and save people, and there are people like out on a boat, so you have to take a boat to like get to them and save them. There was one year, a car accident,
Jeez.
people like wrapped around trees and fake blood. It was really horrific, also very traumatizing.
Did
Anyway,
you
girls
save them
camp,
with magic salves?
I think we used real medicine. Yeah.
Listen, girls camp was nuts.
Yeah.
And yeah, persecution and prepperism were really at the heart of it. It makes me think about being in Sunday school as a young kid, and our Sunday school teacher was a lunatic.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you later who it
They
was.
often are. Ooh.
You'll As soon as I say the name, you'll be like, "Yep."
You can say it and I'll bleep it. Oh, for sure.
She specifically called out me, our brother, and the bishop's son in this group of young teenage Mormons and was like, "You three need to be ready because you have righteous fathers and your families are going to be called up at the last day when Christ returns to the earth. You're going to need to be ready to go to Missouri." Again, Missouri was a big part of all this.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just going to be a part of that, like, second coming.
Wow. And all the
So
other kids
get
are like,
ready.
they're
All
like,
these
what
other
the
kids are
fuck?
like,
What's wrong with
"Wait,
my dad?
I'm not special enough to be persecuted and have to march to Missouri." And I was like, oh, geez.
Yeah.
Sounds like a drag.
Can I get out of this somehow?
And I remember going home that day and telling mom and dad, and they were both like, "Oh, brother,
Yeah.
how absurd."
Yeah.
But everybody knew she was absurd, and yet she was teaching teenagers,
Right.
and no one stopped her.
Yeah.
And there were plenty of other people in the world who would have taught us the same nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
It
I
was
came home.
mainstream.
Yeah. I came home telling so many ridiculous stories, like fantastical stories made up by the Sunday school teacher about their idea of when Joseph Smith found the plates, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever their own twisted opinion on gay people. But it was like basically in line with the church. So nothing ever happened. And our
Nothing ever
little
happened.
impressionable minds just had to hear the wild ramblings of a truly
Yeah.
unhinged person.
Literally never did I see consequences for an adult who taught something racist, homophobic, sexist, fear-based, problematic,
No.
which is how the Westovers of the world thrive.
Exactly.
Like back in that thread on Facebook where they were reviewing Educated, they were like, "Oh, he was the ward mission leader when a friend of mine was a missionary there." So, like, he is in leadership positions in the church, working with young, impressionable Mormons.
Right. And that's exactly the problem. It's not evidence of there being no problem.
Mm-hmm.
That's the problem.
That's the problem. Yep. So, persecution complex galore.
Yeah.
Prepper stuff happening. We had food storage. Everybody had food storage. That was common Mormon practice. I don't know if it still is. I assume it is. To have years worth of food storage in your house. Like relatives of ours, it's like their whole basement is lined with like jars. And your faithfulness in the church is in part measured by how much food storage you have. So don't tell me we're not survivalists.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. And I was going to say, though, nowadays, I feel like food storage and emergency preparedness is maybe a good idea, since we live in the age of everything is burning down and flooding. Yes. And let me get my hands on some of that. I do have actually some prepper things that I'm very proud of that were purchased by her parents.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were gifts. Like a little backpack or it's actually big, a duffel bag of supplies
Now that
that
you
we
mention
can
it, I
take.
do too. I have that for mom and dad.
And
And
it
like
is a great comfort to me. But
having a 72-hour kit is a great idea. Having
Mhm.
food storage in your house is a great idea. I'm not saying that it's not.
Right.
Having years worth is maybe a little extreme,
That ends up
but
getting thrown away.
also, right.
Yeah.
But also the mindset behind it was you need this because either
Mhm.
like the earth is going to burn at the second coming and you're going to
Mhm.
need to feed your family, or you're going to be like so persecuted that you're going to have to like hole up in your house and eat your stores.
Right. Yikes is the
It was
word.
because you were a Mormon that you needed food storage.
Right. Yeah, we weren't like, "Hey everybody, you
Yeah.
need food storage. We're
Yeah,
the
do you
food
want
storage
some of mine?
church." Right.
No.
No.
Another way that I see mainstream Mormonism reflected in Tara Westover's book is the way that abusers are enabled and shielded.
Yeah.
And we've already talked about this a little bit, but I just want to like explicitly mention the recent AP article
Mm.
about abuse cover-ups in the church.
Yes.
I'm sure lots of our listeners are familiar with this. If you're not, you can really easily Google it.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it's like a known fact that when someone confesses to a Mormon bishop that they're abusing a child, that bishop is instructed to call a helpline of the church, not the authorities, not the police, not child protective services, but a church helpline that more often than not directs them to lawyers.
Yes.
So instead of protecting children, what's happening is the church is protecting itself,
Mhm.
its bishops,
Mhm.
and abusers.
Yeah. Whatever can keep the heat off of them.
Mm-hmm.
That's it seems to be all they care about.
And you see that so much in Westover's story about her own father, her own brother, the way that, they're still in good standing with the church. They're still leaders in the church, but also they're being upheld by the members of their family who are used to a patriarchal structure that
Mhm.
holds up abusers.
Right.
It's natural to do that at home when you're doing it at church.
Yeah. And at this point, I mean, for example, her mother is an abuser.
Yeah.
You can only watch your child actively be abused for so long before you become the passive abuser.
Right.
Yeah.
And in fact, her mom wrote a rebuttal to Educated.
Yes.
I learned in my research for this episode. So, Tara Westover's mom, Laurie Westover,
Mhm.
self-published a book titled Educating just a couple of years after Educated came out. Here's how she describes it. I want to tell the story of my life as I really lived it. And I
Mhm.
want my grandchildren to know who their grandmother is and was. And I want to be a force for good in their lives. Also, I feel a compelling desire to shine a light of accuracy on homeschooling, herbal medicine, and the living of a conservative and Christian way of life.
Yeah.
So the book, which I obviously didn't read and not going to read,
No, no,
has
no.
abysmal reviews on
Mhm.
Goodreads and Amazon and everywhere. But one of the reviews I found is from Tara Westover's sister-in-law.
Mhm.
So her brother Tyler, his wife Stephanie, writes a review of Educating, and it is wild. And
Yeah.
she's basically like, this book is horrific. It's filled with gaslighting. She's
Right.
trying to like rewrite the history of her own family in a
Mhm.
way that protects her son, who's a horrific abuser, which I have seen with my own eyes, and that discounts her daughter, who's had the courage to like speak up. And then at the end of her review of Educating, she writes, to step into Val and Laurie Westover's world is to lose touch with reality, which
Mm.
is why I no longer do that. I hesitated to write reviews, but in the end, I felt the need to speak truth, defend the victim, and give hope to those who might be in similar situations.
Mm. Yeah, good for her. Yeah, she mentions she couldn't even finish the book.
Yeah. But like the fact that the family writes this rebuttal to Educated and that it creates further rifts within the family. I mean, this family is so divided.
Mhm.
And we've talked about this in previous episodes how like the big claim of Mormonism is that it keeps families together,
Mhm.
but it really often does the opposite.
Yes. It keeps perfect, quote
Mhm.
unquote, families together.
Right.
If everyone can live without doubt in the church and in each other and be completely loyal no
And,
matter
like,
what.
toxically loyal.
Yes. Loyal for no good reason and in close proximity to each other and just completely honest. I mean, it's just, I don't know how people do it.
Mhm. And, like, Tara Westover talks about how in the final section of the book, she's becoming more estranged from her family, she's becoming more distant from Mormonism and the beliefs she was raised with, and her dad and mom visit her at Harvard, and her dad's like, "Let me give you a blessing and save you," like a priesthood
Mm-hmm.
blessing.
Yeah.
And she part of her wants to receive that blessing, wants to just kind of give in and be like, "You're right, I'm wrong. I believe what you believe." But she can't do it. She
Yeah.
can't, like, deny what she now knows to be true, but also to be false. And no matter how much she wants to, she can't.
Yeah.
And, I felt that, like
I thought
there
that was really brave and unexpected because she
Mhm,
had been having such a hard time not just reverting back to that 16-year-old self
mhm,
who just falls into line and believes what she's told, even if it goes against what she knows.
mhm,
And I thought that was really brave. I mean, I'm pretty sure that I accepted priesthood blessings when I shouldn't have.
mhm,
It's a really hard thing to say no to.
mhm.
It's a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've ever been offered a priesthood blessing since not believing in the church,
Yeah.
but to be offered that, especially by someone you love and
Yeah.
care for, is a big gesture, and
Yes.
to reject it is a big rejection.
Right, especially when it's so easy to just say yes, even if
Yeah,
that's not how you feel.
but that's kind of what the sort of toxic loyalty of the church preaches, is that you set aside your own values, your own beliefs for the beliefs of the whole.
Mhm.
You choose the family
Mhm.
over yourself.
Right. There's a reason why you care so much and it burdens you so much to care for and toil over your family loyalty, and it's because it's right and it's good, you
Mhm.
know? But
No
that's just
matter
not
the cost.
necessarily it's just not necessarily true.
Yeah. A couple of other quick things, very mainstream. The toxic modesty culture that Tara Westover talks about. Her brother is like constantly accusing her of being a whore. She's
Mhm.
like so self-conscious of her body, so aware
Yeah.
of herself as like unclean.
Mhm.
There was one thing she said that struck me so much, I just wrote it down. She talked about her worth as a person being conditional and being bestowed by people
Mhm.
like her dad or her brother
Mhm.
or the church. And she said, "What was of worth was not me, but the veneer of constraints and observances that obscured me."
Mm.
Whew. I got
Ooh.
like goosebumps just reading that again.
Yeah.
It's not you inherently that have
Mhm.
value and worth. It is your ability to act out
Mhm.
this kind of person
Yeah.
that is valued by these kind of people.
Yeah. 100%.
So true
Yep.
to the Mormon experience.
Yeah. That is it.
That
That's
is
what it
it for
is.
a woman in the church in a
Yes.
nutshell.
Here's the mold. Uh-oh, you don't fit?
You better
Shoot.
pretend.
Yes.
And then the last thing I was thinking about with this was I was sort of asking myself, like, did I know a lot of survivalist Mormons growing up in the
Mhm.
church? Did I know a lot of people with these kind of extreme beliefs? No, I didn't know a
Mm-mm.
lot of them. But did I know some? 100%.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about people I knew at BYU who were like 16 and they'd been homeschooled and they came from families with like 14 children, and they had like really significant gaps in their like knowledge and awareness. And I
Mhm.
just think like, oh, now I kind of get like what that was.
Yeah.
Or I think about a mission companion I had years after our mission. I read in the news, I just happened upon news that her parents had been convicted of child neglect. of one of her younger sisters, and their defense was, well, we use these herbal remedies. We don't know why she's dehydrated and malnourished and gangrenous. And
Gangrenous. I know, I read that.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Frankincense isn't going to cut it.
No, no, no. And they actually served time in jail.
That's
And
wild.
this is my
Good.
mission companion.
Wow, that's a connection.
That is like as mainstream as it gets, right?
Yeah.
You're going on a Mormon mission. I also noted last night when I was thinking about her and thinking about this episode, I did a little digging and I
Mhm.
found her parents' joint Facebook account. And I
Mm.
just had this hunch. I was like, I just know that they're Westover acolytes, like
Yeah.
Westover fans.
Yes.
And I looked at their list of likes, and there it was. Butterfly Express, the
Wow.
Westovers essential oil business.
Mm.
And I was just like sort of stunned.
Mm. Sympathizers.
So yeah, it's not everybody, but it is there.
Yes. That's not even a that's very wild,
That's not a
Louisa.
friend of a friend. That was my mission companion.
They went to jail,
Yeah.
as these mofos should.
So anyway, this is all to say, is this a book about Mormonism? Absolutely. Does this book reflect our upbringing as mainstream Mormons? No, but also yes.
Yeah.
And I think if active Mormons read it and feel defensive, they should look at themselves a little bit.
Yeah.
There's a reason there.
Yeah. Examine yourself, examine your families,
Mm-hmm.
your family structure. You'll see it.
You'll see it.
It's there.
I one kind of overwhelming thought I had while reading the book this time. This was my second time reading it. I just had this sort of like analogy forming in my brain while I was listening about how growing up in the church is like growing up with someone holding something right in front of your face. And for the purposes of the analogy, let's say it's the Book of Mormon, right? Like the Book of Mormon is right here.
Yeah.
And when something is right in front of your face, you can't see around it. You
Mm-hmm.
can't see past it. All you can see is that thing. And there's something about being educated, and whether that's formally or informally, whether that's in just being educated in your own beliefs, your own like internal values, your own inherent worth, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
that like sort of moves that away. And
Yeah.
and it's pretty shocking how much there is to see when that is removed.
Yeah.
And like I feel like Tara Westover describes that really beautifully, but like I feel like I've experienced that
For sure.
since, especially since leaving the church. It's like moving the blockage out from in front of your eyes and realizing like, oh, there's a whole world here.
Mm-hmm. The way that people outside the church live is valid and
Mm-hmm.
safe
Mm-hmm.
and good.
Right. And you don't have to like spend all of your energy devoted to upholding this belief when that belief is like contrary to who you are,
Mm-hmm.
when it's counter to like science and fact and evidence. You
Yeah.
can, in fact, believe things that most people believe.
Yeah. And don't doubt your doubts. Listen to your doubts.
Right. They're there for a reason.
Yeah. Sometimes they're nothing, but you got a good brain. Listen to
Yeah.
it.
Anyway, great book.
It was a very good book. I am really excited to not have to think about it anymore.
Yeah. It's heavy to go through the process of experiencing this book.
Yeah.
You like worry that she's not going to make it out alive, even though you know she will
Mhm.
because she writes the book in the end.
Right. Yeah.
And as a Mormon, it's particularly heavy because it's hard not to reflect on your own upbringing and see the traces of it in the brutality and mania of Tara
Yeah.
Westover's story.
Mm-hmm. And just in her inability to just let them go.
Just let
Just
them
let
go.
them go.
I know. I actually finished the book just this morning, and there's this last ditch effort she makes to go back to Idaho. And I was like, "What?" I like
Yeah,
out
I
loud
know.
was like,
Me too.
"Why? Stop
Yeah.
going back.
Yeah. Let them
What is
go.
it gonna take? Like, how many times do you need to be like physically threatened and dismissed and gaslit before you just stop?"
Apparently that many times. It took
That
that
many
many
times,
times.
however many times it took, it finally happened.
Yeah. And God bless her. Please bless
God,
Tara Westover.
please bless Tara Westover.
Mm.
It seems like she is being blessed because now she's a famous person and a millionaire. And I did look at her website, and she has like books she recommends for folks who have experienced trauma.
Mm.
And she also has this note that like, I'm stepping away from my own mental health from like events and things for a while, from interviews, and I'm gonna focus on other things. And it just made me think like how heavy it must have been to
Oh,
write this book, have the world react to it, have to engage with it for years.
yeah. Your mom's rebuttal. It's
Oh,
just a nightmare. Yeah.
yeah, the family lawyer made some statements. The mom wrote this book as a rebuttal. Yeah, take a minute
Yeah.
and just disconnect maybe from this because it's a lot.
Bless her. I hope she's taking a nap.
I hope so too. I hope she's watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer
Oh,
guilt
yeah.
free.
I know. I want to know what she's watching on TV.
What are you watching on TV right now, Katie?
House of the Dragon, obviously.
Yeah, same. I actually am in a Game of Thrones rewatch because of House of the Dragon.
That's very exciting. How are
It's
you? How are you liking it?
it's been great. There's a lot I didn't remember.
Hmm.
It's been
It's
fun to revisit.
great.
Yeah.
It's the best. I have also been watching the show on HBO called Doghouse.
Okay.
It's a British reality show where folks, like families, go to a dog shelter, and the people working at the shelter like set them up with their perfect match. So it's almost like a little
Oh,
dating show where they meet a dog and then get to take it
that
home.
sounds wholesome.
10 out of 10. It's incredible. I kind of have a hard time even watching it. I'm a big animal person, but not specifically like a dog person. I have a hard time watching it because I'm like, I gotta go get a dog
Yeah.
right now. Like, it's the sweetest and it's just so British.
So
Oh, speaking
cute.
of Britain, rest in peace, Her Royal
Oh,
Highness
yes.
the Queen.
Listeners will be hearing this episode in a couple of weeks, but today is the day that Queen Elizabeth passed away.
Yeah.
R.I.P. Please
Rip.
bless the royal family.
Yeah.
And
Please
please bless
bless
this podcast.
Queen Camilla or whatever.
Well, on that
Amen.
note, follow us everywhere. Please bless pod.
Hmm.
Email us at pleaseblesspod@gmail.com. Follow us, write some really nice reviews, send us a DM,
Mm-hmm.
listen, watch on YouTube, all of it.
Do it all.
And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Amen.
Amen.